I thought it would be neat to practice by having a couple of Photoshop icons and doing a couple of different shadows, just kind of practice our shadow work a little bit here. So I have this one that's angled. I'm going to create my new shadow layer, put it underneath. Just going to go ahead and title that shadow real quick so I can keep track of my layers. I'm going to grab my brush tool and go ahead and start painting on a shadow. And you can see how quickly you can make pretty cool shadows. Just going to maybe have it pop here. Maybe the light source is coming from this direction. And let me go ahead and start to trim it a little bit. So that, I mean, there's so many different kinds of shadows that you can cast. Let me go back in my history. I kind of like how I had it before, right there. And let's feather it. Let's do a 50% opacity just along the edges so it kind of slowly, the shadow slowly transitions. And let's go to my layers. Let's reduce the opacity of the shadow. And we can even do a new layer and draw in a much darker shadow. So we're going to do that, make it real small. Just along the edge. So you can see the most shadow along the edge. There we go. Really helps it pop out. I need to delete that little bit right there. Let me zoom in just a little more so you can see. So there's one shadow, and we'll do the next one. So let's do something really different with this one. This one's laying flat on a surface. I thought it would be neat if we did this one standing up, but also had the effect that it's floating in midair. So a little trick, there's a couple tricks to do this to make it easy. Since this is a square box, it's going to probably cast a square shape shadow. So I'm just doing the rectangle tool. I'm going to fill in a new layer with the paint bucket tool. So that's our simple shadow. And let's make sure it lines up a little bit with this. There's going to be two things I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to try a motion blur. And so you'll notice it blurs it all on this horizontal line. You could do different blur alignments, but I'm going to keep it at 0 angle and click OK. And now I'm going to need to soften it. So a great way to soften an object is go back to blur and do a Gaussian blur. So this will equally kind of distribute it a little bit. So you can make the shadow look blended like that, or you can make it tighter. Whoops. But I think it looks pretty cool like around this. There we go. Perfect. So now it has a shadow that's actually being lifted off the ground. The tighter we bring the shadow, the lower it's being lifted off the ground. So right there, it just looks like it's maybe popping out, coming out at you. If you bring it down here, it looks like it's floating on midair. If you bring it here and make it cast a larger shadow, it can look like it's floating even higher. So let's go back in our history. I kind of liked it where it was right about here. I think that looks pretty neat. And that could be cool too if you want to actually have it be really close to the ground. You can see the ground becoming realistic right there. Let's make it float just a tad because I think that's fun. And so we'll do something different with this last icon. Last but not least, we have our last icon, and I'm going to do a different shadow, maybe one that is cast up here. So maybe the light source is coming toward the front, and it's being cast toward the back. So I'm just going to do a simple shadow all the way across these two edges. Okay, and I'm going to reduce the opacity. And we're going to feather it a little bit, take our eraser tool at 40%, and just kind of smooth it out. And I can go back and add a new layer, a new shadow layer, and do a darker color. Let's do black. And make a much smaller brush. Just ever so slightly go up the top. Cast a little bit of a darker shadow. Oops. So I think the trick to all this is to have layers. So you don't have just one flat shadow. It feathers, but there's also darker areas as well. That helps you create realistic shadows. Let's back that off a notch. And there we go. So we have a couple of different shadows that we cast. I think this one got deleted. But there you go. Just different ways we can do shadows.